a love story. It was more than just lust, but it was done so well and so quietly that it was hard to call it a passionate affair. Upon reflection, however, it was a deep love, the kind where two souls touch and wrap themselves around each other like vines on a fence. This is the kind of love I always wanted and thought I had with my wife of 32 years, Tracy, until 12 years ago when I discovered otherwise. That revelation shook me to the core and nearly killed me. But we weren't attending my funeral now, were we? Still beautiful in her 55 years, Tracy sat next to me and wept openly over the loss of her longtime colleague and friend, Jean, while the pastor spoke of Jean's wonderful qualities as a man, father, son, brother, and friend. I was there to support my wife in her grief. She had worked with Jean for 30 years, and in that time had become a pretty good friend, the kind of friend who goes to lunches with co-workers, shares family stories about the kids, and so on. All the while I was listening to these stories through Tracy, and in that moment I felt like he was my friend, because I knew so much about him and his family. I had even met Jean and his wife, Laura, at several events related to Tracy's work, and generally all four of us got along great. So it was a big shock to Tracy when she received a call from another co-worker on Saturday morning informing her that Jean was dead, apparently having been the victim of a robbery in the parking lot of a small motel in our town the night before. Crime had been on the rise in town lately, plus our house had recently been broken into, and the thieves had taken my .22 caliber pistol and most of Tracy's jewelry. But that was just a break-in, as frustrating as it was. And here we were talking about death. Like Tracy and me, Jean was 55 years old and in good shape, with a boyish face and thinning gray-brown hair. He was a good-looking guy, but not Brad Pitt, just an ordinary man living an ordinary life with 2 grown children. From all the stories I'd heard, he and Laura had a lifestyle similar to Tracy and me. Nothing too crazy, solid financial situation. They fiddled around in the yard for fun. They were just in the wrong place at the wrong time, as the police would later point out. I felt not an ounce of remorse as the coffin was loaded into the hearse to be taken to the cemetery. I was silent for the entire 20-minute ride while Tracy sobbed almost uncontrollably. The short graveside service took only 5 minutes, after which we walked back to the car to drive home. As we approached the car, we saw a man standing by the driver's seat with a legal-type envelope in his hand. When we got within a few yards of him, he motioned toward us, holding out the envelope to my wife and asking if she was Tracy Lyons. Wiping tears from her eyes, she answered in the affirmative, and as she took the envelope from him, he said, "You have been served." Tracy quickly yanked her hand away from the bailiff as if he was a contagious disease. Her moist eyes widened with surprise. She looked at me, then at the envelope, as if her brain was slowly making the connection. When the server quickly withdrew, Tracy undid the clasp on the envelope and pulled out the papers. She flipped through the first page before tears started to well up in her eyes again, and with unsteady steps, she slowly made her way to her side of the car where I was waiting for her, holding the door open. The 15-minute ride home passed in silence, save for Tracy's soft sobs and sniffles. While I expected the dam to burst at some point, I wasn't about to be the initiator of what would undoubtedly become a shitstorm. When we got home, Tracy walked into the kitchen and sat down at the table. I followed her into the kitchen, got a beer out of the fridge, and sat down at the table as well. "Why are you doing this? And why on this particular day?" she asked quietly. "And in a cemetery?" While I wasn't exactly proud of myself at that moment, I wasn't in the mood to back down either. "Because I felt it would be appropriate for you to lose us both together if you want, just as you lost us both." Tracy's face met my gaze. She was shocked, to say the least. Apparently, her douchebag husband had finally figured it out. Yeah, I never meant to hurt you," Tracy stammered. "You know I love you." "Love you?" I challenged. "You've been doing this to me for at least 22 years. Yes, I know Haley is his." She looked at me in utter disbelief, her mouth wide open as if she couldn't figure out how to make a sound. I went back to the fridge for beer number 2. It was probably a good thing I had a 12-pack of bottles in there to start with. "How long have you known? How did you know?" she asked. "We've been so careful, both for your sake and Laura's." "That's right, for me and Laura's sake. I see. I've only known about it for the last 12 years. You guys have been awfully careful. I've got to hand it to you." "You didn't actually give it away. Only a spouse would have noticed something that tipped me off. Then I hired a private investigator and he confirmed everything. Remember the company Christmas party where different spouses teamed up and played password? You and Jean were on the same team, and you did great. That's where you scared me. You were giving clues as a married couple, using body language and assumptions just like we would. And that's when it hit me. You two were having more than just sex, more than just an affair. And you didn't even notice when I went quiet and stayed that way for weeks. I hired a private investigator, and he followed you for 3 months, documenting your lunches, your dates, 2 business trips during which you shared a room even though the company was paying for 2. He noted how you rescheduled your date days so that there was no pattern and that they fit into your normal routine of errands, doctor's appointments, etc. He especially noted that you two seemed to be in love, unlike the usual lust-crazed lovers who just roar like animals. By now I was choking up, tears streaming down my face. "I loved you, baby. How could you do this to me?" sobbed I. "I still love you, Lee. I always have. And I always will. It's just that there's room in my heart for Jean, too. I didn't plan this. It just happened, and I couldn't give up on either of you. And Jean felt the same way about Laura. So we just made some space for each other and did our best to cherish both of our loves," Tracy said softly. "Then explain it to Haley," I shot back, perking up. She looked at me surprised again, but I didn't have time to continue. "Not knowing how long you've been together, but knowing how long you've worked together, I decided that I needed to have the kids' DNA tested. And I remembered to bring the plastic cup that Jean drank from at the last company meeting so they'd have something to compare it to. And, son of a gun, Haley was a perfect match for husband number 2. Well, if it's not a sign of love when husband number 1 unknowingly raises husband number 2's child, I don't know what is." Tracy blushed thickly and lowered her head. I sat staring at my wife in silence while she sat there feeling increasingly uncomfortable. "I'm waiting," I demanded. "Let's hear it from the beginning. You owe me that much." "Apparently, it's not easy to tell your husband of 32 years that you've been cheating on him for 24 of those years." Tracy stuttered, cleared her throat, stuttered some more, and then finally spoke. She said the affair started innocently enough, as workplace flirting among good friends, and it was 6 months before the first sexual encounter. The excitement of illicit sex was immense, and remained an important component of their bond for at least the first 2 years. Given that they each had busy home lives of their own, carving out a few hours a week to spend time together was challenging, and great difficulty was followed by great reward, Tracy said. But as they spent more and more time together and worked hard on the logistics to make things work, the couple gradually realized they had fallen in love. Though they didn't fall out of love with their spouses, Tracy continued. Haley really was a fluke, Tracy said. They had bareback sex the whole time, though, because Tracy started taking birth control pills without my knowledge, and when she had to stop taking the pills for a while because of a medical procedure, she forgot to inform Jean, and for 2 weeks Tracy was an accident just waiting to happen. And when a home pregnancy test after 12 weeks confirmed Tracy's suspicions, she decided not to tell me about it and let me think the baby was mine, since we always had naked sex and I didn't know Tracy was on the pill. Tracy knew I would be thrilled to have a third child, and I didn't disappoint her. Even now, years after I found out she wasn't mine, I still love Haley just as much, and no one will tell me she's not my baby. So how exciting was it for you to carry another man's baby? Interrupted me. Don't tell me you didn't think about it, and you certainly must have thought about how much you disrespected me by doing it. I was right on both counts, and all Tracy could do was brush away more tears in response. After a pause of at least 30 seconds, she finally replied in almost a whisper. I felt incredibly sexy the whole time, knowing that I was knocked up by another man, she admitted. And it always made me feel really good to watch my 3 children playing together, knowing that I was a mother to all 3 of them, and 2 good men were their fathers. And now I'll always have a piece of him because of Haley. She said the last statement a little too proudly for my comfort. Just keep that knowledge to yourself, because as far as I'm concerned, Haley is my daughter, and if she ever finds out otherwise, I'll burn you to the ground. I have pictures and videos that I wasn't going to use, but if I have to, I will, I hissed at Tracy. This exchange obviously brought Tracy completely back to reality, and her tone changed from soft and relieved to argumentative and unpleasant. That was fine with me, because I hadn't expected it to be this easy. So why did you wait so long to get a divorce if you knew about it for so long? She hissed at me. Did I miss the chapter where my big, strong hubby discovered he liked being a cuckold? At this point, she got me. Not that I wanted to be a cuckold, but I was surprised she even knew the term. You can thank the state for that. When I went to the lawyer with plans to file, he explained to me that you'd get the house, the kids, and child support on top. If I had stayed until the kids were out of college, losing the kids and the house would have been a foregone conclusion. We would split the income from the house and your alimony would be less too. He told me that since you were sleeping with one guy, the chances of you getting sick were slim, and continuing a relationship with a beautiful woman like you until the last of the kids were out of college was certainly better than what awaited me if I went ahead with the divorce. So if I were smart, I would swallow my pride and let you have your second husband, at least until you wanted a divorce. Neither of us knew then that both of you would prefer to leave things as they were and for the long haul. So for me, it was a marriage of convenience. I got my beautiful wife for 5 or 6 days a week, and Jean for the 1 or 2 remaining days. And while I no longer loved you with the same passion as I did before I found out about the affair, I still loved you, loved our children and our lives, so discretion really was the better part of valor. Tracy looked at me with mild surprise, probably because she had never thought of me as conniving. I guess she always thought she had the upper hand and would pull her own strings if need be. And Haley graduated 2 months ago, I added. My plans for you both were made years ago. You have my plan for you in front of you, I said, nodding toward the papers. However, my plan for John needed to be executed first, and for that I needed just the right opportunity. What plan for Jean? What are you talking about? Asked Tracy, perplexed, her voice rising with panic. You of all people should know my abilities and my train of thought, but perhaps after cheating on me for so long, you've decided that I'm a lowlife, a complete idiot who isn't even capable of knowing his wife is leaving, so why bother with retribution? You realize, of course, that since you were the last person to see Jean alive in public, at the Rusty Clam where you had lunch, the police will naturally want to get a statement from you. And if they do any DNA testing, they'll find out that you were the second person in the room he rented at the Horizon, under an assumed name, of course. At the very least, you'll have to come up with a damn good story for Laura. You sleep with her husband, and then he turns up dead. Not good. Not a pleasant coincidence. Tracy's face reflected a jumble of emotions. I'd said enough, but not too much. Was there any truth to my hints? Would the police think she'd killed Jean? They'd probably have to tell Laura about Tracy having sex with Jean at the Horizon, and if they investigated further, they might uncover a lot more for the widow. I went to the refrigerator to get beer number 6. I just sat at the table and watched Tracy's haggard face, tears cascading down her cheeks as she sobbed. I had actually been waiting for weeks for Tracy and Jean to start using the Rusty Clam, Horizon combination. I knew it was one of their spots, but because they were so careful, they had several combinations they used. But Horizon was my best bet because there were no security cameras in the parking lot. When Tracy told me that the work gang was going to blow off steam on Friday night, about 2 months after Haley's graduation, and informed me that they were going to visit a bar on the north side of town, I knew it was a hoax and that I had a chance. Thanks to my private investigator work a few years earlier and my personal investigation over the years, I knew that they often dined at the Oyster, a seafood joint of sorts, and then went to the Horizon for a conjugal visit and then a husband and wife cuddle. It might have been cute if it weren't for the fact that they were both already married. I told Tracy that her plans were fine with me. I would just go to my favorite sports bar and act obnoxious all night. And that's what I did on Friday night, making sure everyone knew I was there and drinking way too much, except that when they weren't looking, I poured most of my beer in the corner of the bar's outdoor beer garden. Then, knowing that my wife was wasting no time, I waited until I was sure they were almost done and headed to Horizon via the quicker route I'd found. As is her custom, Tracy left a few minutes before Jean, heading to the gym for a quick shower and wipe down so I wouldn't find out anything, and Jean showered at the motel so Laura wouldn't find out anything either. 15 minutes after I saw Tracy leave, Jean, who always checked in at the Horizon as Mr. and Mrs. Gary Washington, left the room. I waited until he had almost reached his car in the parking lot before he showed himself out of the shadows of the building. I called his name and he froze in place when he realized it was me. Before he even saw the gun in my hand, he was scared because he thought I'd finally found out about the affair and was going to beat the shit out of him. He should have been so lucky. I put a couple of 22-bullet rounds in his chest with a gun that was supposedly stolen from the house and watched his fear turn to agony and then death. Husband number 2 was dying in the parking lot at the fault of husband number 1. I probably should have regretted taking a man's life, but after so many years of cheating, I simply had no compassion left. I took the gun apart to later turn them into several incinerators around the city and went back to my alibi. I slipped through the back door of the sports bar and headed to the restroom, where I punched myself in the stomach with my fist to induce a good amount of vomiting, which was heard by several people standing near the premises. At this point, a few of my buddies came over and drove me home. When Tracy got home around 11:30, I was lying in bed, snoring like a freight train, or so she thought. Without turning on the light in the room, she quietly undressed, kissed me gently on the forehead, and whispered, "Good night, my ignorant husband. I love you." I sat at the table for 3 more beers without saying a word, while Tracy sobbed like a baby. These were hard days for her. On Friday, she had 2 loving husbands and a wonderful life. By Monday afternoon, she had no loving husbands and was the mistress of a dead man investigating a murder. Admittedly, 12 years of waiting was a long time, but every now and then patience pays off.